Hello and welcome to this very special program, Election 2020, The Future of U.S. Foreign Policy. I'm Christianne Hardy, Interim Director of the Dickey Center for International Understanding, and I am joined today by three very special guests, each of whom has deep experience within or across agencies responsible for the implementation of the United States government's foreign policy. Our goal today is to elucidate the key differences between a possible second Trump administration foreign policy and that of a possible Biden administration. In short, to identify what is at stake from a foreign policy perspective in this November's election. Helping us to make sense of these differences are Ambassador Johnnie Carson, currently a senior advisor at the United States Institute of Peace. Ambassador Carson served in the U.S. Foreign Service for 37 years. His last position in the State Department was as Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, a position he held from 2009 to 2013. Prior to that, he was the National Intelligence Officer for Africa at the National Intelligence Council. Ambassador Carson's Foreign Service career includes ambassadorships to Kenya, Zimbabwe, and Uganda, and Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of African Affairs. Earlier in his career, he had assignments in Portugal, Botswana, England, Mozambique, and Nigeria. He has also served as staff officer for the Secretary of State and staff director for the Africa Subcommittee of the U.S. House of Representatives. This is not Ambassador Carson's first visit to Dartmouth. He was a Magro Family Distinguished Visitor in International Affairs at the Dickey Center in 2018 and taught a class on U.S. policy in Africa. It may, however, be his first virtual visit. Also joining us is Dr. Chris Savos, Vice President of Special Projects at JTG Inc. and Director of Proficiency One, an online training company launching this year for national security and risk intelligence professionals. He also designs and delivers leadership, analytic, and professional skills training programs to a range of clients in the intelligence community and private sector. Dr. Savos has 22 years of experience as an executive manager, leader, analyst with the Central Intelligence Agency, where he earned the Distinguished Career Intelligence Medal, the agency's highest award for career service. He has held numerous leadership positions within the CIA, running regional analytical units that followed sensitive security and foreign policy issues in the Middle East and South and East Asia. As Deputy Director of the Weapons Intelligence, Nonproliferation, and Arms Control Center, he helped drive agency analysis of foreign weapons of mass destruction, conventional weapons, space, and technology development programs. Chris also served a tour on the National Intelligence Council as the Deputy National Intelligence Officer for the Near East and South Asia, in addition to spending several years in the Directorate of Operations. He is a Dartmouth graduate of the great class of 1988. Rounding out our panel is Ann Witkowsky, a national security expert who has held leadership positions across government and the private sector. Currently a non-resident senior democracy fellow at Freedom House, Ms. Witkowsky's most recent government position was as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Stability and Humanitarian Affairs, where she advanced Obama administrative initiatives such as support for UN peace operations and the U.S. Ebola response. Prior to that role, she held leadership positions in the State Department's Bureau of Counterterrorism, building civilian programs and policies to prevent terrorism. She has also served on the White House National Security Council staff as a Director for Defense Policy and Arms Control. In between stints in government, Ms. Witkowsky was a Senior Fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. She is the recipient of the Secretary of Defense Medal for Distinguished Civilian Service and the Department of Defense Medal for Outstanding Public Service, as well as Superior and Meritorious Honor Awards from the Department of State. She is also the proud parent of a member of the class of 2024. Welcome to you all. I have asked each of our panelists to provide a very short, high-level summary of how they view the key differences between the two possible administrations before voters in the fall. Ambassador Carson, let's begin with you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be back on the Dartmouth campus, even if it is virtual. Foreign policy under the Trump administration has often been erratic and confusing, but it has mostly been characterized by an American First agenda. Under Trump's American First agenda, the current administration has taken a unilateralist approach to many of the challenges confronting the United States and the international community. The Trump administration has generally downplayed and sometimes damaged relations with many of our strongest and closest allies in NATO and Western Europe. It has pulled out of important international agreements and organizations, including the Paris Climate Change Agreement, and now the threat to move forward in pulling out of the WHO. It has cozied up to a number of the world's worst authoritarians and dictators in Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East. The administration has also downplayed issues like human rights, climate change, and global health issues. And it has frequently been at odds with the United Nations. I think that under a Biden administration, and I certainly do not speak for the Biden administration, I would think that they would seek to bring some order and strategic clarity to America's foreign policy. They would reinvigorate their relationship with key partners and allies in Western Europe and in Asia. They would strengthen the relationship with NATO and also with Germany, France, Great Britain, and some of the other key partners in that part of the world. I think a Biden administration would also strengthen its international relationships. It would go back into the Paris Climate Change Agreement. It would probably remain in the WHO. It would work very hard with the UN on some of the more troubling transnational issues. I think the Biden administration would also look at trade issues in a more strategic and clear fashion. It would probably reinvigorate its effort to become a part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It would look again at trying to establish a free trade relationship with Western Europe. And it certainly would do more on key transnational issues across the board, from climate change to trying to renew a global effort to contain Iran's nuclear threat. And it would certainly give human rights and support for democracy and inclusion greater priority than the current administration. I'll stop right there as an opening thought. I can elaborate on some of those as we go forward.
Wonderful, thank you. Dr. Savos, your thoughts?
Johnnie, I think you shared most of my thoughts already. I'll try and add on and not just repeat. When I thought about this, I really looked at it from the standpoint of what are these different ways that a second Trump administration and a Biden administration would think and act in foreign policy. And I came up with 5 main differences. And I think, Johnnie, you actually touched on most of these. The first one, I think, is under a Biden administration, it would be much more of a national interest-based foreign policy, something that we all can tend to understand. Whereas I see what we have now is much more of a personal interest-based, and it's much more difficult to figure out what those personal interests actually are at any point in time. And closely related to that is a move back to what I would say is the more traditional and predictable approach in the United States to foreign policy in terms of how we behave in the world, as opposed to what I would call the last 4 years of maybe novel and unpredictable in terms of some of the things that happened. I think about just, looking at how we have dealt with North Korea. There was a very traditional way that we've done it. There's a very non-traditional way we've done it in the last few years. I expect we'll go back to more traditional. Johnnie, something you said that I think is hugely important and is going to really be probably the primary difference is the belief among a Biden administration, I would say, going back to collective action and this idea that alliances are actually a source of strength, as opposed to a much more unilateralist approach that we've had for the past few years, where alliances are almost seen as a sign of weakness. And this idea that there's really no such thing as a win-win in international relations. And we always have to be the ones coming out on top there. So I definitely see a difference there. From the standpoint of how I used to be involved in the process, I see a difference of going back again to actually having a formal process that is understandable and somewhat predictable, as opposed to one that's driven more by personality. And here I don't just mean by the president's personality, but by the personalities of various peoples in different parts of the administration. So I see it going back again to a more predictable approach. And I think the last main difference, and Johnnie, you touched on this too, is a U.S. foreign policy that goes beyond just interest-based, however you want to define that interest, to values-based, and starting to talk more about democracy and human rights, and looking at the rise of authoritarianism in the world in a very different way than it's been looked at in the last 3 years. I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. Batting cleanup, Ann Witkowsky?
Yeah, great. I think the one thing I would add to what's been said about what former Vice President Biden has articulated about his approach is that he believes in the connectivity between America at home and America abroad. And if you look at some of the things that he's said, he's talked a lot about the need to lead by example, the need to restore our own democracy as a source of power and influence in working together with other countries, other like-minded countries, other democracies abroad. And I would echo what my predecessors have said, also Chris and Ambassador Carson have said, in that I think he would absolutely focus more as a priority on concerns regarding the rollback of democracy around the world, about illiberal trends, and in countering authoritarianism. And we can come back to the process question. I think there will be some restoration of the processes that in a Biden administration that we as professionals came to know in both Republican and Democratic administrations in modern times.
Great. Thank you all very much. So it sounds like radically different worldviews, right? Evidenced by something I've heard repeated across the three of you, between a sort of America first approach versus a multilateral, constructive engagement, global engagement through alliances. What about where the nature of the threats might be? So different worldviews, how are sort of the threats to U.S. security and U.S. interests articulated between these two camps?
If you want me to start first, I shall, and say that there will probably be one similarity that touches both administrations, and that in fact is the rise of China. China's growing influence in Asia, the rise of China's military and sea power, China's influence in technology, in cybersecurity, in 5G technology, and in digital communications and surveillance. I think that China's rise has come to the attention of both parties and both candidates. How they deal with China, however, will be starkly different. I believe that in a Biden administration, there will be a more strategic and sophisticated approach towards China, looking at ways that the United States can cooperate with China, looking at avenues and areas where there will be competition with China, and there will be on occasion red lines where the United States will want to say no and talk about those seriously. So I think that under a Biden administration, you'll see the whole complex layer of policy, strategy, and diplomacy being carried out. I think that under a second Trump administration, we will come very, very close to confrontation with China. And we could, in fact, end up in a new Cold War with China. And we might even find ourselves in conflict in one or two soft spots with China. Instead of taking a strategic approach, I think it will be, as Chris noted, a lot of personal approach. I think that ad hocism will rule the day, and that there will not be a great deal of thought about how the China matrix is handled. But under a Biden administration, I see beyond China 2 or 3 other areas that will be important to deal with. I certainly look at the administration trying very hard to have a strategic approach towards Russia and Russia's aggressive expansionism into Central Europe. I think there is concern about Russia's bad behavior, especially towards its near neighbors. I think there will be a continued interest in looking at both the South Asia axis of problems, and there I am thinking specifically of Afghanistan and Iraq, and an effort to continue to draw down and disentangle there. And I think also taking a look at the Middle East. I think those are the 4 areas. I think with a Trump administration, I can expect more erratic foreign policy behavior. I see, as I said, confrontation and conflict with China over technology, over trade, over South China Sea, not handled well. I don't see any improvement in the relationship with NATO or Germany or France. I certainly don't see any commitment to dealing with global transnational issues like global warming, like the issues of nuclear arms control. I'll stop right there. There are a bunch of things that will remain the same and will be disconcerting and dizzying as we watch the administration handle its foreign policy if it has a second term.
Great. Thank you. Other thoughts?
I'll just add on the China side. The way I see it is, another Trump administration will continue what I see as a policy of a very aggressive confrontation with China, but only along one dimension, really, which is the economic and trade side. In the other areas, I really haven't seen a lot. They're not saying much about what happened in Hong Kong or what goes on within the country. Whereas I see under a Biden administration, because there's different values that they're pursuing, you could have a less intense but much broader front of confrontation. And the Chinese are always very sensitive about United States comments about what they're doing domestically. There's going to be a lot more of those under a Biden administration than there would be under a Trump administration. On the Russia side, I agree completely with what Johnnie said. I think a Biden administration is not going to be any more free lunch for the Russians in terms of what they're doing in this country, in terms of what they're doing in border states, and basically what they're doing around the world to to pretty aggressively undermine U.S. interests everywhere. So I think that's going to be a big change for U.S. foreign policy that have a lot of implications for everything from military posture to technology policy to, again, rebuilding those alliances that have unraveled a bit.
And you've done a lot of work around counterterrorism. Focus has been sort of removed from a lot of the work that a previous administration has undertaken. How do you view a potential Biden administration looking at those measures versus a second Trump administration?
Right. Well, I think what we know so far is that in one particular area, I think there'll be actually kind of a point of continuity, and that is the commitment, I think, both that we've seen from the Trump administration and from Joe Biden in his candidacy to bring the vast majority of our troops home from Afghanistan and Iraq, focusing our mission in Afghanistan on Al-Qaeda and in Iraq on ISIS. So there may be different ways that we go about this. There may be surely differences in the details, but I think in the broad parameters, there seems to me anyway to be some similarities. One challenge that is we all face going forward, without commenting on where a Biden administration would necessarily go, but that is questions around repatriation of former fighters, about countering violent extremism, about how to stabilize to stabilize societies, fragile states, where there may be opportunities for the continued spread of terrorist organizations. So that's a general challenge that I think we face into the future. And I don't think we know just yet exactly which administration, whether the Trump presidency, a second Trump presidency term, or a Biden administration would exactly behave on these issues. I think we know from my own service in the Obama administration that there would definitely be an emphasis on what to do on the civilian side of this huge challenge that we face if we don't want to be in forever wars into the future.
Great, thank you. Well, so you raise an interesting point about the utilization of different levers of foreign policy available to the administration. So whether it's partnering with, say, civilian organizations in the effort to counter terrorism abroad, or using the agencies of the U.S. government, the intelligence agencies, the Department of Defense, et cetera. What are likely to be the broad differences between a Trump administration and a Biden administration in terms of the utilization of the different levers of foreign policy?
Would you like, is that directed
Sure,
at me?
you take it. You go.
All right. Well, I feel like Ambassador Carson might usefully get a good shot at this because of his long service in the State Department. But I think we know that former Vice President Biden has really focused already on the importance of diplomacy as the first instrument of American power. That's what he said. I think that's what he believes. We've already articulated some ways in which he might advance our interests through diplomacy. And I think that focus will be reflected in his views of the institutions themselves that exercise that. So first and foremost, the State Department, and reinvigorating the Foreign Service, or elevating, I would say, the Foreign Service as a principal tool of foreign policy. I can see some changes that could be made with respect to some of the inner workings of the U.S. government that are not generally visible to the public, in terms of the way that that the U.S. government lays out its policies, considers options, executes and implements its policy through the instrument of the National Security Council staff, where I served for a very long time. One other thing I'd just like to say about a potential Biden administration is that former Vice President Biden has committed to seek gender parity in his senior national and full diversity in his senior national security appointments. So he's clearly given some thought to the way that he wants his top officials, his leadership group to look. And I think that says something about the way that he's thinking about the way that he wants to run our foreign policy, to draw on the talent of our nation to advance our goals as effectively as we can. It's harder for me to speak of what a second Trump term would look like in this particular area. I think we've seen that there just hasn't been a whole lot of focus on these institutions and on the career folks who are in them.
Ambassador Carson, anything you wanted to pick up on?
I would agree fully with what Ann has said. The White House currently has held the career foreign service and the professionals at the State Department in fairly low regard. Mm-hmm. The administration over the last 3.5 years, has hollowed out the professional corps at the State Department. It has retired a number of senior officers and not filled key jobs for months, if not years, both in Washington and overseas at key embassies abroad. The administration has also put in an increasingly large number of political appointees into positions that were formerly held by career State Department officers, and they've certainly increased the number of political appointees at overseas missions. I think that the current administration's disregard and disdain for the foreign policy establishment in Washington is reflected in its annual budget requests to Congress for the State Department, USAID, and the other international development agencies and organizations. Certainly on the development and foreign policy side, the administration has consistently sent budgets to Capitol Hill with significant cuts in them, as much as 30% for aid and the State Department in recent years. Thankfully, that money has been restored by the Congress, but the fact that the administration continues to send budget requests forward that significantly reduce the funding for the foreign affairs agencies is a reflection of how it feels about the professional corps.
Understood. Dr. Savos, speaking about the intelligence communities, we know that the current administration has had its tussles with the intelligence community. How do you view a distinction between what a potential Biden administration would do and what has been the way in which that community has been treated by the Trump administration?
I don't think it'd be more different. Now, I always have to say that the remarks I'm going to make are my own. I've been out of the intelligence community for a few years, but it's really a dramatically different picture. I think if you get another Trump administration, one of the things that happens is you kind of are going to lose the space for objective analysis being given to policymakers, that the continued politicization is going to get to a point where there just isn't going to be any more objective analysis leaving the building, going to the normal set of customers downtown. Another thing that the intelligence community really focuses on is our foreign partnerships. And those have been kind of left in tatters. And I think that will continue under a second Trump administration. It makes it very hard for the agency if other other countries don't trust our word and don't trust what we're going to do, it makes us harder to have partners come along with us. I also think, on a more personal standpoint, thinking about the people involved, that another Trump administration will lead to two things: a continued hunkering down of we're just going to get through this until we're back to some sense of normality, but also I think a surge in retirements. There is a significant percentage, certainly of the analytic core, that is of retirement age, but stays on because frankly they love the job and they love the mission. Their ability to actually do the mission they signed up for originally has been severely degraded. So I think you would see a lot of that. Now, if Biden comes back, I would expect a little bit more of a return to normality, of an expectation that one of the core things that I was supposed to do as an analyst is tell truth to power. There is absolutely no appetite right now for telling truth to power. So I think that would come back in. I would certainly expect that under Biden. I think you would also see a return to a feeling of there's respect for the people who literally risk their lives in the intelligence community to perform their mission. And I always go back to the very first day of the Trump administration, well, I guess the second day, the 21st of January, 2017. Very surprisingly, one of the first things he did was he visited CAA headquarters. And he did it in a way that, in my opinion, basically spit in the face of every person who sacrificed their life for that organization because of where he chose to make very personally aggrandizing political remarks in front of the wall of stars at the agency. And it just has gone downhill from there. Also, I think with Biden coming back, we'll get more to that normality that I talked about. So a predictability in terms of the interagency process and how the intelligence community plays into that. And then the last thing, I already kind of mentioned the flip side of it, was being able to rebuild those foreign relationships so that we have a greater ability to work with partners around the world.
Wow. So radically different worldviews, radically different views about the utility of the different agencies of foreign policy that exist for the implementation of an administration's policy. Some serious challenges with the potential for funding, retirements, a sort of a hollowing out of these agencies. It sounds like a potential Biden administration is going to have a lot of work to do if he wants to use the traditional arms of U.S. foreign policy in the ways that they previously existed. What might be the top three things that a Biden administration would need to do if elected?
I think from the intelligence community, it's easy. Just going back to having respect for the mission and the objectivity, and to actually listen to your own intelligence community more than you listen to enemies of the United States. It's easy for him on the intelligence community side, in my opinion.
What about within the State Department, Ambassador Carson?
I think a Biden administration would bring back in a number of senior career officers at high levels, make critical appointments in Washington and overseas that would reassure our partners and allies that we're back in the business of collaboration, partnership, and cooperation. I think that critically, who the Secretary of State is, who the deputy secretaries are, who are the key assistant secretaries, and who are placed in key ambassadorial appointments, including the UN and in other parts of the world, will clearly show where the Biden administration is going. I think that bringing in, and there are a number of them, very well-placed senior individuals who have been a part of the career service, bringing them back in strategically, if even for just short periods of time, will have a very high motivational impact. I think officers who have run away from difficult and non-controversial posts will come back in and be willing to take on more difficult and challenging jobs, both in Washington and overseas. I don't think that we lack the talent inside the building, and I don't think that we lack the ability to bring in young and able newcomers into the diplomatic service. I think it is the leadership at the top giving a inspirational and strategic message about the importance of the work they do and the value of the people who do it will in fact bring about the kind of quick recovery that we need. The real question is the question of how quickly our partners will respond.
Excellent question there. And Witkowsky, I mean, thinking about all of the different agencies that play in coordinating policy across both official and allied partners for U.S. foreign policy, you know, potentially how long could this take? I mean, how big is the challenge that a Biden administration has before them to utilize these resources that were previously there to enact a policy that clearly relies upon them, if it's going to be multilateral, if it's going to be, you know, engaging a variety of our partners? How much time?
Right. Well, I think Ambassador Carson put it very well when he said the key factor is leadership. The talent is there. The question is leadership. And so in that sense, I think changes can be made very quickly. Yes, we need to bring up the next generation, not only in the Foreign Service, but through our civil service tracks, through our intelligence service tracks. We need to continue to do that, to continue to recruit. I think the talent and the interest is there among our young people. The question is, how would a Biden administration affect greater utilization, enhancing morale, and generally deployment of the talent in these agencies? And so I think we need to start. The Biden administration would need to start with the question of leadership. I think an important piece of that will be the way that the National Security Council staff is organized. Again, this is not an area that we see a lot of from the outside looking in. For those of us who have served in government, it is clear, however, that how the White House organizes itself, what it chooses to focus on, how it chooses to set priorities, what it leaves to agencies, especially the Department of State and the Department of Defense, as well as our other national security agencies, to implement. How effectively it does that can matter. It can matter a lot. And I think this is an area that will be very important for next administration to focus on. One detail that that Joe Biden has mentioned already is that he will seek to reestablish the Global Health Security Office. Mm-hmm. It may not have exactly that name, but it will be the office that was in place before and that focuses on pandemics and working with our friends and allies, potentially not only on the COVID response, we'll probably still be in a response phase on the COVID recovery, but on preparing for, planning for, thinking about what might come our way next.
Great, thanks. Other thoughts on, you know, priorities for a Biden administration coming in, you know, given the current circumstances of our foreign policy agencies?
I think Anne touched on one, and I think that there has been a de-emphasis on a number of issues, and I think you can see a Biden administration putting more emphasis on respect for human rights, more emphasis on support for democracy, rule of law, fair and transparent elections. I can see an elevation of the part of the department that deals with climate change. There will be a greater role given to the Assistant Secretary who deals with ocean, environment, and scientific issues. They will be empowered. I can see a stronger emphasis being placed on issues related to youth globally, and to gender equity, both in our foreign policy and, as mentioned, the importance of having it in our bureaucracy, but it will also become an increasingly important issue in our in foreign policy in engagement. And I think there will be a renewed emphasis on technology and the foreign policy implications of technology and how we deal with technology across national borders and boundaries, both of the technical side as well as the messaging side. So I think all of those things are likely to come out of this. I think that the fact that the Trump administration has de-emphasized some of these issues will highlight, if a Biden administration comes in, the elevation of them once he's in office.
Understood.
And I
So
think,
go ahead, please.
I think the challenge of what Ambassador Carson just said is you have a priority system that seems to work now of, okay, right now it's Iran, and now it's North Korea, and now it's this, and now it's that. And it's very focused, but it kind of jumps around.
Mm-hmm.
But what you just laid out is now there's all of this stuff we're going to start caring about again, and getting those wheels turning in all those different places is going to be a real challenge, I think.
Right. So the shift from a very minimalist, more narrowly defined foreign policy as has existed under the Trump administration, one that doesn't include, scientific cooperation, doesn't include, sort of a global health front, doesn't include, youth development or these kinds of issues, right? Shifting from a very narrowly defined, focused, but perhaps rapidly moving focus in the Trump administration to a much more comprehensive, sustained, expansive understanding of foreign policy under the Biden administration is a pretty heavy lift. But I'm hearing from those of you who have familiarity within the different agencies, the capacity is there. It just needs to be motivated. Is that correct? Yeah.
I think that the U.S. has always, up until now, in recent years, had the capacity to undertake multiple foreign policy objectives and strategies across the globe on geographic issues as well as on functional issues. I think that if you have a fully empowered State Department and an effective National Security Council staff, both aided and in collaboration with an intelligence community, the U.S. has the capacity to undertake multiple foreign policy objectives at the same time. Some of them are bound together by the need for collaboration with our partners. I think both Chris and Ann have, in their comments, have both noted the fact that we, as a nation, do best when our foreign policy is backed by our principles and values at home, and where there is broad consensus at home based on our principles and values for doing the things that we do abroad. People know that they can see a level of integrity, sincerity, and honesty in what we're trying to accomplish and achieve. But the other part of it is the fact that we need partnerships and alliances to be able to effectively try to create a global environment which is not only good for the United States, but good for all of our partners and all of the larger community that we live in. The United States can't accomplish an improvement in climate change alone. We can do it in collaboration and partnership with others. We can't change China's behavior alone, but we can do it better in collaboration and partnership with others. But if we, in fact, take the opposite approach of not doing anything about climate change, then it only gets worse. We're the anchor to the progress that needs to be made. If we don't do anything with China except make the relationship worse, we disadvantage our own country economically and politically, and China gets the benefit of us being the odd person out.
Understood. So two excellent points that you're making. One is the need to have some consensus domestically on the values and the policies that we want to project internationally, problematized by the fact that there's not a whole lot of consensus on many things in the United States today. So I'd be curious to get your viewpoints on the degree to which our own domestic polarization problematizes any foreign policy, whether it's of the Trump administration or a potential Biden administration. And then secondly, the sort of the international response. Where do we have the biggest challenges facing us globally, either in alliance formation, partnership forming, or in potential hostile environments? Two questions out there for you. I don't know, Ann, Chris, if you want to tackle either of those.
I'll try the first one, which was, now I've lost my train of thought. The first one, which was on how hard it's going to be to get people to actually listen, given that we're divided at home. I think a lot of the different things that we need to do that Johnnie was talking about comes down to, are people really going to trust us that we've gone back to who we used to be as opposed to who we've been the last 3 years? And the more divided we are after the election, the more people are going to think, okay, maybe this is what it's going to be now, but can I really trust the United States to be the country that it was in the entire post-war period? Maybe not. And that's going to affect us in a lot of ways, in terms of people actually signing up to agreements with us, in terms of the fact that we talked earlier about the different levels of levers of power to bring to foreign policy. We don't have soft power anymore. The overall view of the United States and other countries, I don't think, has ever been lower. No one aspires to be us anymore. They're wondering what the heck's going on. And that's a very different place to operate when you're trying to take a role of leadership in the international stage. And we've sort of stepped back from that role. Stepping back into that, you don't just get to do it and have everyone suddenly accept you. And I think that's going to be a really big challenge for us.
Excellent. What about on the international perspective? So you've talked about states not trusting us. How much harder is that going to make? Certainly, it sounds like for a Biden administration, which really is going to rely on a kind of multilateral approach to these complex problems, how much harder would that make for a Biden administration? But also, what are the ways in which it problematizes what a Trump administration would want to do or is doing?
Well, I think Chris really put his finger on it, in the sense that if there is a Biden administration, the conversation will not only be about what are the Biden administration's policies, how are they different from the Trump administration's policies, but what's going to happen into the future? Will there be consistency? Can we continue to come to the table with you and trust that there will be follow through on whatever these commitments are that you're asking us to sign up to? So I think this change could take a little bit of time, and there's no question that what's going on within our own borders is going to influence the perspective of our friends and allies and others, as to influence their perspective on who we are and what it is we're saying, what it is we're asking, and how it is we're seeking to influence with respect to our own policies at the table. And I think that's one reason why Biden has really focused on this connectivity between policies at home, investing in education and criminal justice reform and infrastructure and our economy, because there's an understanding of the influence of how other countries see us on how effective we might be in rebuilding those partnerships abroad. I'm sorry about that. But Biden has said something which I very much like in his candidacy in an article back in the spring, and that is the world does not organize itself. And so I think, although we've talked a little bit about the U.S. stepping back from a leadership role, it's my personal view that our leadership would be in the right way, would be most welcome again going forward.
Yeah. If I could just throw in a thought there and say that I think that while people will, as Chris points out, be suspicious and distrustful initially, I think that the receptivity of us coming back to normal will be welcome and probably more warmly received in places where we've always had strong partners, and that's in Western Europe and in some of our key Asian alliances, including Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. I think where it's going to be more difficult is in places where leaders and governments have taken advantage of the fact that the U.S. Has not been engaged actively or forcefully or in a committed fashion in defending democracy, rule of law, and human rights, where we have not been as forceful in condemning the reversals of democracy or the reversals of political space held by opposition leaders. And we have not, in fact, been condemnatory of transgressions against women and LGBT community members and religious groups. I think where there has been human rights, democracy, and equity backsliding, those countries and those leaders probably are far more bold and empowered now because of what's gone on with our foreign policy, as well as what they see in our own country, that it will be harder to reverse the clock with them, but it can be done. I'm optimistic that as we deal with our partners, our long-standing partners, that they will be happy to see that the fever has been broken in Washington and that things are now on a more healthy track.
Sounds like a mixed bag for whichever administration is declared the victor, hopefully very shortly after the election, and that in either case, both potential administrations would suffer from an election without a clear result or a clear concession from the loser. Fascinating. I'm looking forward to rejoining you at that moment post-election, when we can talk again about what's ahead for U.S. foreign policy, when we know who that administration is. Thank you very much, all three of you, for joining us. And we'll see you back in November.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.